Hello everybody, my name is Megan. You're watching Miss Megan Knits. Links to everything I talk about will be in the description box below. Today we're going to do something a little bit different. I am going to talk about 10 things I wish I knew when I was a new yarn crafter. And for this, I'm going to be knitting because I started out with knitting, and by the time I got to crochet, I had learned a lot of these things already, and so I applied them. But they can also be useful for new crocheters. This is the second time I'm recording this, by the way, because the fireplace blower thing was on and I didn't notice until I played the video back and it sounded like crazy. So I'm doing it again now that the fireplace is off. Tip number 1, YouTube is your friend. Tutorial channels can literally teach you how to knit and crochet. For those, I would recommend Very Pink Knits and Jaden Stitches Crochet, just because they're very helpful. They've taught me a lot. Podcast channels can inspire you and provide tips and tricks. Now, the key with the podcast is to find someone who you'd want to sit down and have a coffee with. Someone who is interesting to you, is fun for you, is someone you just want to chat with, because podcasts are basically just chatting into a camera about your knitting. So you want to find someone that you really like to listen to. Personally, I follow the Grocery Girls, I follow Sparger Yarn Crafts, and I follow Yarn Hoarder, just because those are my kind of people. Feel comfortable sitting in my living room watching them and knitting, you know? It's just fun. If I met them in person, I would love to go have coffee sometime. Other types of channels can be useful and fun. You can find memes and relatable things and stories and all kinds of stuff on YouTube. So just check out, even just search knitting and see what comes up. Tip number 2, Ravelry. Completely free, totally awesome. All you need for Ravelry is an email address. It's completely free. They don't spam you with emails. They don't do anything weird like that. There are so many features to that website, but the ones I use the most are the pattern database, the stash feature, the groups, and the project pages, and I'm going to briefly run down what each of those are. The pattern pages, you can browse hundreds of thousands of patterns online, and lots of them are free. So there's lots of free downloadable patterns, as well as patterns you can pay for and then download. You can also, if you're a designer, you can publish patterns, and then people can pay you for them and download them. So that's pretty cool. You can keep your yarn stash organized and keep track of how many yards are left of each kind of skein. I have all my skeins of yarn on my Ravelry stash, and I can look and kind of compare side by side and see like, oh, well, here's a pattern. Can I use this yarn? Do I have enough? Things like that. You can join forums of groups to interact with other knitters, participate in knit-alongs where everybody knits the same thing or knits something according to the theme, and show off some of the stuff you've made. You can keep track of all the details of your projects on the project pages, adding info such as the amount and type of yarn used, the needle size you use, your gauge. You can add pictures. You can add notes that say basically anything you want, things like pattern modifications or how long it took you to make or whatever. Anything. You can also browse and view others' projects for inspiration, modification tips, stuff like that. There's all kinds of ways to search the project, so you can see like, I want to knit this pattern, who else has made this pattern, what does it look like? You can see it on a lot of different yarns and a lot of different people. There's also so much more you can do. Really, check it out. You won't be disappointed. Tip number 3, be part of a community. Even if it's just lurking online and reading what other people post about stuff, it makes you feel more included, and it's just really great for inspiration, help with any problems you may have, and just company and support and chit-chat. Some ways you can find a community. Local yarn shops often have knitting groups. You can ask around and just find places that way, places like libraries and coffee shops and local yarn shops and all kinds of places like that often have knitting groups. If you want to go online, Ravelry has groups dedicated to interests or geographical areas or supporting certain designers or all kinds of groups. Join as many as you want. Are you on Reddit? There are many subreddits for knitting and crochet. Subreddit knitting is very good for basically all of your knitting needs. Everybody's super helpful. In all of these subreddits, everybody's super helpful and super nice. There's a subreddit crochet as well. There's a subreddit casual knitting, which is a little more laid back than the actual knitting subreddit, which has some guidelines that you have to follow. So if you want less guidelines, casual knitting is for you. There's a subreddit Yarn Trolls, which is more of memes and jokes and things like that related to yarn crafting, knitting, crochet, whatever. And there's even a subreddit called Drunk Knitting, where people take pictures of their works in progress with the alcohol they're drinking and talk about, you know, knitting while drinking. So if you're interested in that, or if you're of an age where you can participate in that, that's pretty cool. And then the other place you can find communities is on YouTube. You can follow YouTubers or channels who relate to your craft, and you can comment and subscribe and kind of join the conversation around them. Tip number 4, learn how to weave in your ends. Some beginner knitters just chop their ends right off. That's not a good idea. Weaving in the ends of projects will secure them, and it makes the project look infinitely more polished. My old projects have ends just hanging out. Like, that was a thing I did not know how to do. For example, this scarf, it's just a garter stitch scarf. I have the ends just dangling. Not a good look. I don't know why I never got around to weaving those in after I learned how to do it, but I didn't. Tip number 5, take your measurements. Don't assume that off-the-rack sizes that you might buy in a store are the same as the sizes in your particular pattern. And don't assume all patterns use the same sizing. So, for example, a small in one pattern might be different from a small in another pattern. The good news is, because you can't assume those two things, patterns provide you measurements. Take the time to measure and determine the proper size. For example, if you're measuring a sweater, you may use your bust measurement. If you are using a mitten pattern, you may use a hand circumference measurement. Whatever it is, take the time, measure, and correlate that with the correct size and knit the size your measurement wants. Oftentimes patterns will have the actual size of the actual finished thing, and then they will have the size of person it's meant for. For example, mittens generally the same size as your hand, but socks are generally smaller than your feet. So, keep in mind those things, and you'll learn. You'll get practice and you'll figure it out, don't worry. I'm going to briefly touch on the gauge swatch. It's important. Do one, learn how to do it, measure it. That's all I'm going to say. They're infinitely important. It's worth taking the time to do it at the beginning of your project just to make sure everything is going to fit properly. If it's something that doesn't need to fit, like a shawl or a scarf or dishcloth, I wouldn't bother. But if it's something that needs to fit onto a body or onto an object, definitely gauge swatch. Tip number 6, use the correct tool for the job. I have a story. So the first blanket I made was a super bulky blanket made out of Hometown USA yarn by Lion Brand, and it was made of a bunch of squares that I sewed together. And I did all the sewing together with this really thick, super bulky yarn with one of these. It was a pain. Threading it was miserable. Getting it through the stitches was miserable. My hands were aching. My mom did half of it because I couldn't even without crying. Okay. Then, multiple projects later, found one of these. Made my life so much easier. Now, for most yarns, projects, small things, you want to use this one. But when you need a bulky yarn, this will make your life so much better, and it was cheap. Another thing you might need the right tool for is a measurement. For example, I have 3 kinds of measurers here. The first one is this clear ruler. I got a Job Lot. It does have measurements on it, inches and centimeters. I have a retractable piggy tape measure, but any retractable tape measure will work. And I have a tailor's measure, which is just a long flat tape. Now these 3 are good for different things. If you're measuring short distances on flat-ish objects, if you're measuring a gauge swatch, this clear ruler is the best because you can see what you're counting as you're measuring it. A retractable tape measure is good if you're traveling, if you have a small bag, if you're measuring small things. This doesn't go as long as the tailor's tape measure, but it is super useful for on-the-go kind of projects, and most of the things you measure can be measured with one of these. The tailor's tape measure might be more useful if you're measuring a body or something really big because it's long and it's straight and you don't have to worry about pulling it out too far and breaking it. The only problem with these is they tend to get tangled up in knitting bags, so I don't use these as my main form of measurement very often, but they are useful for measuring big long pieces and, again, bodies because they're very flexible. So you can measure around your bust or your leg if you're trying to make a skirt, or around your head if you're trying to make a hat. They're really easy to measure bodies with. You don't need to buy fancy or expensive tools. None of the tools I listed were more than $3, $4, $5. But if you know what you're trying to do and you can buy the correct tool for that task, your life will be so much easier. Tip number 7, Learn to fix your mistakes. And in parentheses, most mistakes can be fixed. Basically, you need to learn two important types of fixing when it comes to knitting. Tinking and fixing a drop stitch, laddering down on purpose to fix a stitch. Those are kind of together because both of them involve picking up a drop stitch. Practice on swatches or on projects you don't care very much about, not on something super important, because then you'll be stressed, and you don't want to be stressed. You want to be relaxed and calm and ready to learn new things. Speaking of tools, a crochet hook can be incredibly helpful, even if you knit, for picking up drop stitches, for messing with stuff on your needles. Just having an extra implement sometimes can help quite a bit. And something else that can help are point protectors. If you're messing with a mistake on one needle, you don't want stuff falling off another needle. So you can pop these bad boys, these are little rubber things, onto your needle, and then things won't go anywhere. If you don't have those, wine corks make a good substitute. You can just poke the needle right in them. Once you're confident that you can fix a mistake, if a mistake happens, you'll be much more confident and bold with your knitting. You'll be more eager to try new things because you can try new things without worrying about making a mistake. Because, oh, I dropped a stitch, I'll just pick it back up. Oh, I purled when I should have knitted, I'm just going to take back and fix it, you know? There's all kinds of things you can just easily fix once you learn how, and you will be so much better at knitting and so much more confident and ready to try new things and learn new things. Number 8, along that same vein, fixing is part of knitting, as well as moving on despite imperfection as part of knitting. Tinking, laddering down, that's just going to be part of knitting. It's not something you did wrong. It's not something you're a bad knitter because you have to do. We all do it. It's part of life. Everyone makes mistakes, so everyone must fix their mistakes from time to time. Really try not to get frustrated. As you get practice at fixing mistakes, it won't be difficult or a big deal to fix them at all, and you'll feel much better about the whole process. There's more to life than simple mistakes. Now, if this mistake isn't structural, and what I mean by that is, for example, a drop stitch might ladder down and unravel the whole thing, but if you purled instead of knitted, or knit with the wrong color in a fair isle, nothing's going to come apart, right? It's not structural. If that's the case, and it's not something that's a huge deal breaker, you don't have a big lump on the bottom of your foot of a sock or something really, really visible or something like that, you might want to just move on and live with it, you know? Ooh, I made a purl instead of a knit there. Oh well. It's not perfect. Chances are anybody else who's looking at your knitting won't notice it, won't think anything of it, and even knitters who are experienced oftentimes miss mistakes other knitters make because you're not looking for someone else's mistakes as much as you're looking for your own mistakes. Number 9, there's more to life than just acrylic yarn. There's nothing wrong with acrylic yarn. Acrylic is perfect for many beginner projects except maybe dishcloths. I would use cotton for that. There's so much variety in color, weight, and texture. It's inexpensive. It's widely available in craft stores, online, and even in big box stores like Walmart. There is no shame in using acrylic yarn, and some people get kind of yarn snobby, and they don't like using acrylic, and if it's not something you like to work with, that's fine, but don't tell other people they can't work with it. You know what I mean? Everybody's different. Everybody has different preferences. Everybody has different budgets. So don't be a jerk to other people. But I will say, if you do love knitting and you get really into knitting, find a yarn store that sells like actual natural fibers and squish the things. Squish them all. You don't have to buy something crazy expensive if your budget doesn't allow it or for any other reason you don't want to buy something. But you might want to walk out of a local yarn shop with a pack of stitch markers or a single crochet hook or something small just to support the business. You can squish the yarns and get a feel for the different types of fibers. Really look at like what's in this yarn and what does it feel like. And then you can start to play a guessing game of, ooh, this feels like wool. Ooh, this feels like merino. Ooh, this feels like, I don't know, Angora, right? You can also make pleasant conversation with the other people you find at the yarn store. You might make a new friend. And you can also check for sales and clearance items. You may get the chance to experiment with new fibers for discount prices. If they're doing a big closeout or a big, like my local yarn shop does a big summer sale, if they're doing a big sale, that's a good time to go because you might be able to get reasonably priced really nice yarns. And my final tip, number 10, and this is something I didn't really stumble across until I was a designer myself. Free stuff is wonderful. Free patterns are great. I use free patterns all the time. I'm not knocking free patterns. But if someone consistently makes things you love, consider buying something from them to support them. Now, I'm mostly going to talk about patterns, but this could also apply to hand-dyed yarn, homemade stitch markers, blogs that you want to support, or anything else in the knitting world. I have basically 3 conditions where I buy a pattern for actual money. It's when I want something specific and there's no free version, obviously. When I've consumed a lot of their other offerings, by that I mean I watch their videos, or I read their blog, or I've used a lot of their free patterns, and I like what I see, and I want to support them. So I buy something from them. And the other thing is, I feel really good when I support someone like myself, who's a smaller creator, doesn't have a ton of stuff, but I know how good it feels to get that email that, oh, someone bought your pattern, and it just makes me so happy that I want to support other people doing the same thing so that they can have that happiness too. Those were my 10 tips for things I wish I would have known as a beginner knitter. Thank you so much for watching, and I will see you in my next video.